Hello Stitchers, it's Janice from Noteworthy Needle. I'm making a quick video to answer some questions I've received recently about Eggstravaganza. I also want to say that this is the Tuesday before Easter, and all of us hopefully are staying inside as COVID-19 is wreaking havoc all over the world. So my heart goes out to you if you've lost anyone to this terrible virus. And by staying inside, we're doing our part. So it's a good thing. We've trained for this. We pull out our stash, we stitch, stitch, stitch. We have an excuse to stay at home and do nothing but stitch. And we are slowing the spread with our needle and thread. So let me go over my project right now to answer some of the questions I've received. So this is Eggstravaganza. This is the chart. We are crafting paper mache eggs. The paper mache eggs are available through your local needlework shop if they are out, but they still have the chart. You can order the eggs from Best by Sankey or consumercrafts.com. They were out of them, Consumer Crafts, for a little while, but I was just notified that they're back in stock. Inside the booklet, you will find the same information I just said, as well as the patterns, the poke patterns, which you just remove from the book, and detailed instructions that I'm going to go over in this video. So the first thing you're going to do is paint your paper mache egg. I've been asked questions on what kind of paint I use. I'm not going to recommend one brand over the other because I've used several different brands and they all work the same. These are just your squeeze bottles of craft paint, your 99-cent bottles that you find at the store. I squeeze some of it out onto a paper plate, or in this case, a little cardboard palette that I have. And I will paint my egg. You just need to paint the top part and the sides. You don't have to paint the back. And I paint half of an egg at a time, a very light coat. So I've already painted the bottom half of this, and now I'm doing the top half. I'm just going to do very light. It doesn't look like it's covering much, but that's okay. We're going to give it a second coat, and the second coat will cover just fine. And the reason why I do it half at a time is because I am a very messy crafter, and I don't want to get this on my table. So once I do the sides and the front of it, then I can set it on my table like this while it dries. And then after that coat dries, I'll flip it over and give it one more coat. I did antique a couple of my eggs. Let me see. I antiqued this one, the sampler egg. And I also antiqued this one, which is the chocolate bunny. What I used was a coat of just regular plain wax, and then a coat or a couple of swirls or dots of antique wax. You can also use bry wax. So I squeezed a little bit out onto my palette. Sorry about that. And then on my egg, I just did some gentle swirls like this, just around the edge of the egg. Then I took a paper towel and wiped where I had put the bry wax or the antique wax. And that's how I antiqued it. If you get a streak, a little too much of a streak like I did there, I just put a little clear wax on it and it kind of worked as an eraser. But that's really all there is to antiquing the egg. Now the next step is to poke the pattern onto your egg. So you're going to remove the pattern from the pattern book. I cut mine a little bit, the edges off, so I can make sure I had it placed on my egg exactly where I wanted it. I put it on with a low-tack tape, which is a masking tape or a washi tape, because you don't want to pull up any of the paper mache egg. What I recommend is a push pin, a poke pin, and this is a jumbo poke pin, quite large. If you do not have one and just want to use a regular push pin, just make sure that it is 1/16 of an inch in diameter. I have had someone ask me if they could use an awl. The awls tend to be a little wider than 1/16 of an inch, and even if you put tape on it, I think the danger of pushing it all the way through may be a little too much, so I suggest a finishing nail. So if you have a finishing nail, you can put this right on the dot on the poke pattern and use a cork to help push it down into the egg, and then you can move along at a pretty good pace with just a finishing nail. If you have the giant poke pin, don't grip it too tight. Your hand will get tired before you get done with the pattern because there's a lot of holes. So you can just poke along like this without gripping too tight. If your hand does start to get tired, I found that it was easier to put it on like this and use my other hand to press down. So place it on, use your other hand to poke down, and just keep going like this. Do not cut the back of your egg until you have finished poking the entire pattern. That has been a problem for a couple of stitchers who said that their poke pin kind of tore along the line when they were poking, and the problem was they had already cut the backs off. So you need to make sure not to cut the back. So you can have those stabilizers in there, you can have the back to help holding it firm. So once you get done poking your pattern, then comes the time to perform surgery on the back, as I say. So you're going to cut off this section of the back using an X-Acto knife. That's all I used. Just put it in, move it quite along. If you run into any resistance, it's because you've hit a stabilizer. Just lift it up, put it back in, and you can continue on around. I left an inch margin. You don't want to go all the way to the edge of your egg, but you want to make the opening large enough that you can stitch the whole entire design comfortably. So after you perform surgery on the back, remove the insides from your egg, that's the stabilizers, and then you can do your stitching. So this one was already stitched, obviously. Once you get done stitching this, you're going to put it back together. You're going to put the stabilizers back inside. This way it will store quite nicely. You can stack all of your eggs together if you want, and they'll stay just fine until next season. Then you're going to put the back on it. Just place it on it. Then I use any kind of a school glue or a craft glue, and I put the glue on the back just in a random pattern, and then I use a sponge brush to smooth it out. And once I've done that, I take scrapbook paper. This is a 12 by 12 piece, but you can use an 8.5 by 11 piece. It is slightly smaller than your egg, but if you just pivot it a little bit, you can find that that will cover it as well. So I smooth that out, I flip it over, and then I cut this with scissors right up against it, and then the back of my egg will be covered and you won't see how you were able to stitch it. So the other issue that I've run into with some stitchers is not following the pattern. So you need to think of this as any other cross stitch pattern. But imagine that the solid part has already been filled in with cross stitches, and then that way it won't play with your mind quite as much. What I mean is when you look at the rabbit ears right here, there is a void. But on your drill pattern, if the stitches were not here, all of this would be nothing but solid holes. So while you're going back and forth and stitching right here, it's very easy to want to put a stitch right here. Don't. Follow your pattern. And then when you put these stitches here, they will go in the holes and then leave this little void here. So it is kind of confusing when you're stitching it and you're looking at all of those holes. But again, as long as you follow your pattern, you're going to be just fine. I also want to point out that on this particular pattern, the one that looks more like chalk, the inside stitches are half stitches. That kind of lends to the chalk appearance. So again, follow your pattern to make sure that you're doing half stitches instead of full cross stitches in the center of the word spring. Other than that, I think it's pretty easy peasy. So I wish you happy spring, and thank you very much for purchasing my Eggstravaganza pattern. I hope that it brings you joy. It brought me joy to make it for you. So happy Easter and stay safe.